In this week's video, I am revisiting this stunning woodland and waterfall location from my old channel, so I can reshoot this amazing, stunning local waterfall. So this is Hatch Brook Waterfall. Now, I've been here a few times, as I've already said, but I was hoping to get a little bit more flow on it today than we've actually got. But nonetheless, still going to make some great images. And I think there are still a few compositions here that I haven't actually got yet. Now, for example, behind me, the ferns that are just in the background there. I think they'd make a great foreground interest for the waterfall that's behind it. Got a few leaves in the water itself that are turning a nice golden colour, even though we are only in the beginning of August. And there are a couple of compositions down at the bottom there that I haven't actually tried yet. But nonetheless, no water flow, or at least not as much as I would have liked, given the rain we've had. But I still think we'll get something pretty sweet. Okay, so the first composition I've actually got, I'm actually looking directly at the ferns here with the waterfall in the background. Now, that is actually proving a bit of a statistical challenge because I want the ferns to be perfectly still in the image, but I also want to get the long exposure for the water. So I'm going to actually focus stack the image to get a nice sharp image all the way through. But I'm also going to have to take an additional exposure for the ferns so they actually freeze the motion. So what I've done, I'll just show you the composition up here that I've got. Now, as you can see, I've got the ferns making up the foreground interest of the image with the waterfall just nicely in the frame behind it. And what I've tried to do, I've actually tried to create a kind of a 50-50 ratio of composition. The greens of the ferns in the foreground mixed in with the white of the waterfall making up the background, and it's kind of a 50-50 ratio between the two. Now, I've shot the waterfall itself at about half a second to actually get the nice smooth flow of water with the polarizer just taking any glare off the rocks and water around it. I focused that with 3 or 4 images all the way up, and then I've taken 2 shots of the actual ferns, one focusing in the foreground and one focusing in the background of the ferns at a 60th of a second. Now, in order to get the exposure to look very similar, I've actually shot at 2000 ISO for the ferns. That's to actually get the shutter speed I want. Now, overall, I should be able to blend those images together in Photoshop and create one long exposure with them, especially since I've already matched the exposure on location. That works out. It's coming up now. Okay, so for this next composition I've got, as you can see, I've got these 2 trees here beside me. It's actually one tree, but it's growing up in 2 different branches. Now, I've set my composition. Here's the footage. I've actually set my composition looking through those trees. Now, I kind of like how the trees are framing the waterfall, but I've got 2 different ideas in mind for this image. One, a focus stacked image which will be sharp all the way through, and the other an image taken at f2.8 aperture, focusing on the waterfall and blurring out the trees in the foreground. I like the texture of the trees in the image, and I like my landscapes to be nice and sharp, but sometimes I do like a nice blue foreground or background. It really all depends on the shot, and I think this shot lends itself to both. Actual waterfall shot at half a second with the aperture of f8, except of course for the one that shot at f2.8 to get the blue foreground. And of course the first shot you're going to see is focus stacked, the second one's going to be the wider aperture. I've had to crank the ISO up to actually get the image. I'm shooting at a ISO of 200, that's to bring the exposure up to where I want it to be. And I've also got the polarizer taking glare off the rocks. If you can see behind me on the video, there is quite a bit of reflection on the rocks. The rocks are very wet, so the polarizer brings that down nicely. I'm going to put both of those images up now along with the shooting settings, and let me know what you think in the comments. After that, I'll come back to my next composition. Now this next shot I'm going to take doesn't really need much introduction, but it is the most common image taken of this waterfall, but it's also the image I'm going to use for the thumbnail of this video. Quite a simple setup, looking straight at the waterfall as you can see. Got these smaller falls in the foreground making up foreground interest. Once again I'm getting some movement in the foliage around. That's unavoidable today because there is a slight breeze in the air. Well, what I want to show you is this. This is a difference a polarizer can actually make to your image. If I just turn my polarizer now and take it off the actual foil, you can see how bright the actual water is on the mossy bank that I've got in front of me. And if I just put the polarizer back, you can see that's reduced all that glare, and it's just brought back the actual water that's flowing down the brook. If that shot's any good, I'll put it up for you. In addition, I actually took another shot just down here, looking up at this small fall with the waterfall in the background, and that was in a portrait orientation. Those images are coming up now with the various settings. Just for your information, I have cranked the ISO up once again just to bring my exposure to where I want it to be. We have got a lot of sunlight coming through at the moment, which is great on the floor of the river, but it can play a bit of havoc with the shadows, with the highlights, and getting all that in balance, that can be an issue. Now for this final shot, I've come a little bit further down from the waterfall. As you can see, I've come well down from it. Now, I feel this is part of the waterfall that gets neglected a bit when being photographed, and I've been guilty of neglecting it myself. I'll show you the composition I've got this time. As you can see in the composition, I've got this nice purple flower making up a foreground interest. Now I'm shooting at 70mm in order to bring the actual waterfall further forward and pose for the flower actually be in the centre of the frame. Not sure how that's going to work. When I blend the images together, I'm going to have to be very careful for any movement of the plant in the foreground whilst maintaining the waterfall in the background. I'm also going to have to be careful with focus breathing when I stack the image, focusing in different parts of the image. A foreground that's really close and a background that's quite far away, that is going to cause some issues with focus breathing, so it's going to be a case of seeing how those images come out. Now I'm also stacking images that are taken at different shutter speeds as well. I've shot 2 different shutter speeds for the foreground to keep the foliage as frozen as possible, to try and keep it as sharp in the image as possible. And I've shot a half-second exposure for the waterfall in the background. What I'm probably going to have to do is stack the first 2 images and then blend the background into them. Whatever happens, that's coming up now. Polarizer once again taking any glare and reflection off the rocks, also bringing out the greens in the mosses and the saturation of the other colours in the image. And an ISO that's been bumped up to actually get the exposure I want. What the ISO is going to do is actually balance the image out. Now, it does come a point where you do get a lot of noise, especially in darker conditions when you're trying to force the image to be brighter. But when you're just taking an image like this and you're exposing correctly, you shouldn't get as much noise. Even on an older camera like the D800. Even if you do get noise, it's not always unpleasant, especially not on a full frame camera, so don't be afraid to crank that ISO up. If this image has come out any good, it's coming up now, and I'll come back to end the video. So there we go, that was my somewhat inevitable return to Hatch Brook Waterfall, which is not actually too far from where I live, but it's a location I haven't been to for well over a year. I thought, well, I'm rebooting this channel and trying to get my old locations back. I thought, why not come out in the sun, the fresh air, get some images in and get a video in of a location I need to revisit. Hopefully you've enjoyed that video, and hopefully you've enjoyed some of the points I've raised in the video about using ISO and making use of higher ISOs to get the image you actually want. Once again, please leave a comment down below just tell me which those images you like best, and any other comment you want to leave as well. I do always reply to comments when I can, and I'm happy to receive any knowledge from other photographers as well. In the meantime, that's the end of another video today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.